Hello everyone, the beta for nod-krai's second patch has been out for a while now, and Nefer will be the 5-star character coming in patch Luna 2. During the first week of her beta, there were a lot of early calcs and conclusions about Nefer being one of the newest best DPSs in the game that was able to dish out very high numbers. And although her kit hasn't changed in the second week of beta, we have learned a lot more about how she plays via private server footage, causing Nefer calcs to be changed to incorporate the new info. So with this updated knowledge, is Nefer actually still looking to be a top 3 DPS in Genshin? Let's take a quick look into her beta kit to see how Nefer works and how good she is currently. But as always, remember that this is very early information from beta, so very subject to change. Nefer is a 5-star Dendro Catalyst user who ascends with crit damage along with having a base 200 elemental mastery. Just like how Flynn's was introduced as the lunar charged main DPS to be supported by Nefer who was released before him, Nefer is the lunar-bloom main DPS to be supported by Llama who was released before her. As such, her special passive is the same as Llama's, enabling lunar-bloom for the party, buffing its base damage by 14% as long as Nefer has 800 EM and counts as a nod-krai character for Moon Sign. As a quick reminder, lunar-bloom creates dendro cores that behave just like normal. The only thing that is different is that you create verdant dews every 2.5 seconds that can be used for certain character abilities, including Nefer herself. However, Nefer makes the lunar-bloom reaction a bit different with her A1 passive. With at least 2 nod-krai characters in the party, after Nefer uses her skill, she turns any dendro cores on the field into seeds of deceit, and any cores that would be made in the following 15 seconds also turn into seeds of deceit. These seeds do not do any damage and only serve to buff Nefer's own damage from her abilities. Thus, Nefer's main playstyle prevents you from doing normal bloom, Nilu bloom, hyper bloom, and Bursion damage, since there will be no regular dendro cores on the field, but instead focuses on Nefer herself. Nefer's elemental skill makes up the majority of her kit. It has 2 charges, and when used, she deals damage and enters the Shadow Dance state. During this enhanced state, Nefer can consume 1 verdant dew to perform a special charge attack called Phantasm Performance. This special charge attack has 5 hits, 2 from Nefer and 3 from her shades. The 3 hits from her shades are considered lunar bloom damage and are thus the more important part of her charged attack. After using 3 special charge attacks, or after 9 seconds, her Shadow Dance enhanced state ends. On top of that, whenever Nefer uses her special charged attack, she absorbs nearby seeds of deceit to buff the damage of her special charge attacks. Each seed she absorbs grants a stack of Veil of Falsehood, and each stack increases her special charge attack damage by 10%. She can have up to 3 stacks, and at 3 stacks, Nefer also gets 100 additional EM. This damage bonus is actually a multiplier increase, so at 3 stacks, the 30% damage bonus to Nefer's charge attack damage just means it gets multiplied by 1.3, making her charge attack damage very important since it's the majority of her damage profile. Nefer's elemental burst is simply a nuke of AoE dendro damage. It also consumes all her stacks of Veil of Falsehood to further increase the damage. Currently, the damage of the burst isn't that impressive however, so a lot of calcs choose to ignore it. Lastly, Nefer's A4 passive increases her attack based on her EM, but since she's mainly an EM scaler, this attack doesn't really do anything for her. Since Nefer's skill has 2 charges, her general overall rotation will look something like this. In some teams, you'll want to start with a Nefer normal attack or skill on the first rotation to apply dendro so that your supports can start triggering lunar bloom for verdant dew production, which is extremely important for Nefer. Using Nefer's skill first also ensures that dendro cores stay on the field so she can absorb them, which can be relevant with an electro support. After the support skills, you'll go back to Nefer to press skill to enter her enhanced state and do 3 special charge attacks. This will end her enhanced state, but Nefer will have a second charge of skill, so you can skill and do 3 charge attacks again. Then you can end the rotation with Nefer's burst if you want. Since each charge attack consumes 1 verdant dew, Nefer will need a total of 6 verdant dews to perform all of her 6 special charge attacks every rotation. Thus, Nefer teams will need enough time to trigger enough lunar blooms at the proper timing, so there is enough verdant dews for Nefer to use. Also, you can dash cancel each charge attack to shorten the overall rotation time, which can increase the team's damage per second. You lose Nefer's second hit by doing this, but you still get all the shade hits, which are mainly what matter because they are the hits that deal lunar bloom damage. That's everything on Nefer's base kit. In terms of her initial beta constellation, C1 gives Nefer additional EM scaling on the lunar bloom portion of her special charge attack. Since there are 3 lunar bloom hits every charge attack, this is simply an extra 180% EM scaling for each charge attack, which also gets multiplied by her A1 passive buff. C2 increases the A1 passive damage buff that Nefer gets from absorbing seeds of deceit. Effectively, instead of the A1 passive giving 100 EM and multiplying her charge attack damage by 1.3 at max stacks, with C2, Nefer gets 200 200 EM and has her charge attack damage multiplied by 1.5 at max stacks. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, with C4 when Nefer is on field and in her enhanced state, the Dendro res of nearby enemies will be decreased and verdant dews will be generated faster. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 gives Nefer more lunar-bloom hits with her special charge attacks. With Ascendant Gleam, lunar-bloom damage is also further elevated by 15%. Overall, pretty standard constellations for a newly released DPS with a strong C1, C2, and C6. Now, let's discuss Nefer's potential build options. Her signature, of course, is her best in slot. To summarize, after the passive is fully active, which will happen normally when Nefer uses her regular combo, the weapon gives a total of 8% crit rate, 120 EM, and 120% crit damage, including the substat. It just gives a ton of stats that Nefer wants. For other weapon options, there are only a few to really consider because a lot of DPS catalysts, especially those with crit, are for attack scalers or HP scalers, which don't really fit Nefer as an EM scaler. Luckily, Black Marrow Lantern is a great free-to-play option as the nod-krai craftable. Gives EM and 48% damage bonus to lunar-bloom damage at R5, assuming you have Ascendant Gleam, which should be the case. Lastly, there is a new 4-star weapon being added to the weapon banner in Luna 2 called Frost Star. It has a crit damage substat and gives EM after hitting an enemy with a skill or charged attack, so pretty much made for Nefer. At R1, it currently isn't better than the R5 nod-krai craftable, but if you do manage to pull extra copies of the weapon, it will get better than the free-to-play option. A similar idea applies with Sacrificial Jade. For artifacts, Nefer is a nod-krai main DPS that mainly deals lunar damage since she's lunar-bloom focused, so her obvious best set and the only set you should use is Night of the Skies Unveiling, as it gives EM, crit rate, and damage bonus to lunar reaction damage. For main stats, Nefer wants an EM Hourglass, EM Goblet, and crit Circlet, though an EM Circlet can be used if you have insane crit substats on it. Remember that Nefer primarily deals lunar-bloom damage with her abilities, which scale with EM and not regular damage bonus, so don't use a Dendro Goblet. For substats, just crit and EM. Nefer's burst isn't too important at the moment, so no need to worry about energy recharge. Finally, let's cover Nefer's potential best teams. Nefer wants two main things. First, she wants Ascendant Gleam, aka at least 2 nod-krai characters on a team, mainly to activate her A1 passive, which significantly buffs her damage. And second, she wants enough Hydro application to trigger enough lunar blooms at the right timings for verdant dew generation. Nefer uses 6 special charge attacks every rotation, which requires 6 verdant dews in total, so having enough dews is very important. As expected, Llama is her most important support. She buffs the base damage of lunar bloom by 14%, provides Dendro Res Shred, and gives additional crit and added flat damage to lunar bloom damage. She is an insanely strong support for a lunar bloom DPS like Nefer. For the Hydro support, the general answer for most units would be Yelan and Xingqiu. While they are usable, Nefer's charge attacks do not trigger Yelan or Xingqiu's coordinated attacks. Instead, you need to add a normal attack with each of her charge attacks to take advantage of Yelan or Xingqiu's burst. But this extends the rotation and allegedly feels bad to play. You can play burstless Xingqiu and just rely on the Rain Sword orbitals from a skill, but I personally wouldn't recommend this for general use, especially when Ino is given for free. Even at C0, I still consider her the overall best Hydro support you can use for Nefer, and with constellations like C1 and C6, she is able to buff Nefer even further. Kokomi is also a good alternative option as a healer in the Hydro slot. For the final slot, Nahida is the best buffer in terms of damage because her burst buffs the on-fielder's EM, which increases Nefer's damage significantly. If you're not using Kokomi and are using Ino, however, the team doesn't have any defensive utility. So assuming you use Ino and you want defensive utility, you can use the final team slot for a defensive support who ideally can provide some damage buffs and doesn't interfere with triggering lunar bloom reactions for verdant dews. You can use Kirara, Baiju, C6 Diona, and Zhongli for instance, and they all work. You can also use Kuki or Anefa. Although their Electro app can interfere with enough lunar bloom procs, specific rotations and Ino C2 for the extra Hydro application will help the team function with enough verdant dews. Now if you don't have Llama, you have two team options. First, you use Nahida as the Llama replacement and then use Ino because you need Ascendant Gleam. Then for the last slot, you can choose any of the defensive supports I mentioned already. Of course, just like Skirk and Flynn's, these Nefer teams function and can definitely clear, but you lose a lot of damage without Llama because she's such a strong support for her. The second team option is just to forget about Nefer's kit entirely and just play her as a Hyper Bloom driver. Should work fine since it's just a Hyper Bloom team, but of course you aren't really playing Nefer as intended. And that's everything on Nefer as of now. Nefer's current highest damaging team based on early calcs is with Llama, Ino, and Nahida. And with Ino C6, the team can reach the numbers of Skirk teams, so technically she is looking like one of the newest top 3 DPSs. However, there are some very big caveats with this team. First, it depends on Ino constellations, and you're very unlikely to get C6 Ino unless you pull a lot on the Flynn's banner. And second, this team has no sustain other than Prototype Amber on Nahida. And with Nefer effectively being a single target melee character character, having no sustain will likely be problematic for most people in actual gameplay. Thus, you are more likely to use Kokomi instead of Aino or replace Nahida with a wide variety of defensive supports, decreasing the team DPS of Nefer teams. These teams are still looking to be top meta teams, but definitely not top 3 DPS level. Including sustain, Nefer teams perform similarly or slightly better than the best Flynn's teams depending on the team and the TC. They are both pretty much the same DPS in different archetypes, having similar team damage and teammate reliances, as just like with Flynn's and Anefa, Nefer really wants Lalma to be strong. Lalma just provides so many buffs to Nefer as a lunar-bloom support. She helps activate Ascended Gleam, buffs the base damage of lunar-bloom by an additional 14%, provides Dendro Restrite with her skill, and gives additional crit and additive flat damage to lunar-bloom damage with her passive and burst. Because Nefer contributes around 90% of the overall damage in her teams, any buffs for her are extremely important, making Lalma essential. Of course, Nefer will do fine without Lalma since the patch's content will favor her, but Lalma is important for her damage regardless, and just like the other nod-krai characters, the Hydro option can easily be improved, and Columbina is likely the upgrade for this position, further buffing Nefer teams in the future. But of course, this is just Nefer's beta kit, so anything could change in the upcoming weeks. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Nefer's kit was helpful to you all. If you enjoyed, I highly recommend subbing to the channel to keep up to date with the latest beta news with TC influence analysis, as well as so you don't miss my detailed pre-release guides. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or like the video if you enjoyed. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.